let's get started. So, we're going to talk about matrix pricing and margin protection because we continuously get a lot of requests, and more so, I think, towards the end of the year on just matrix pricing and what you can do to make more margin. So, Chuck, this is your favorite topic. So, why don't we jump right in?
Well, I don't know if it's my favorite topic, Kaylee, but it's certainly a topic that seems to come up more and more. This has seemed to supersede inventory control somewhat because margins tend to dwindle and have dwindled recently for a lot of different reasons. But those are some of the things. Today, we'll spend about a half hour just doing some general overviews on matrix pricing and your margin protection. And then in January, we're going to do another one of these and go into basically some real life examples. And in the interim, some of the things I'll relate and share with you, stories or whatnot, real life situations we've gone through day in and day out with over 300 clients will really help you guys maybe listening to evaluate your pricing matrix. And pricing matrix, remember, means everything. That means customer pay, internal warranty, whatnot. Warranty, of course, is locked in, but discounts to wholesale customers, counter retail, and whatnot. Once you listen to a lot of this, and this is just us experiencing this with different dealers in different markets, you'll come to the understanding that, wow, if I just take some time to really evaluate what's going on, it could help tremendously in margin protection at the dealership level. So how much matrix will a market bear? Looking at this slide, determine the maximum pricing matrix that meets market demand without sacrificing sales volume. A lot of times what we see with people going after warranty uplift and so forth, they tend to try to inflate their matrix to get that level up for a short period of time. And I always make the comment that thank God I'm not shopping at this dealership during this 60-day period while they're trying to get the 100 samplings and get the markup to get from the manufacturer under warranty. But one of the things that we really discovered, and I really want to emphasize this because I've said it for the last year, is that when you're dealing with matrix, the first thing you really have to look at, everybody wants us to look at customer pay to begin with. Customer pay repair. What's the markup? What can we do? And the first thing you have to do is back up and pull your customer pay RO, gross profit percentage. You get that in your financial statement that says you sold so much at this cost and my gross profit was X, using a generality of 40%. And one of the things as we go through this and start to look at different matrices is the average dealership, and this should come as no surprise to those of you that are parts managers, only about 10% of parts anymore are really matrix. The other 85, 90% are a lot of menu priced items or tires or accessories, whatnot, that you're doing menu pricing or selling at suggested retail. One of the things that I've heard, and if I had a dime for every time I'd heard a dealer, general manager, or fixed operations director or parts manager come to me and he or she says, but my matrix 10%. I just got back from a 20 group and I have a dealer there. They're making 42% gross profit and I'm at 38%. Well, when only 10% of your parts are being escalated in those sales, bumping up 10% in some instances may sale-proof parts and make unrealistic lists that you can't sell. When 90% of what we see typically tends to be, 85 to 90% being in these menu-priced items and price-sensitive things, it's really tough to get that 10% to try and cover the other 85%. So again, this is just us looking at this day in and day out and doing analysis on different dealerships. One of the things with all these dealers that we deal with, and some of you are clients that are listening here, One of the things we see so often, and I can say this with a lot of confidence, every matrix out of 300 or so clients, using a round number, I see 300 different matrices. Nobody's exactly the same. We do have a handful of dealers that still sell everything at suggested retail and don't matrix. Their gross profit numbers tend to be a little lower. The best way thinking about this is, doing, accessing your customer tolerance for pricing fluctuations is important. But compare your matrix pricing with similar products or brands. Looking at your competition, calling around, having a secret shopper that does some comparisons with some of your competition around to see what's being quoted. And of course, one of the things here, and this says it perfectly, emphasizing quality and service benefits is really critical to sustaining that higher price acceptance. I mean, car dealerships, your dealer has invested thousands of dollars in training and whatnot for your specific product. Every car dealership's service department literally is the Nordstrom's compared to the aftermarket. And I know I continually still go to dealerships because I work with a lot of you day in and day out, and I know the quality of work I'm going to get done at a dealership is 90% greater than it would be in the aftermarket. Not that there's not some aftermarket shops out there that do a good job, but when people bring the vehicle into the dealership, 95% of the time they want good quality parts because they were tired of replacing an alternator 4 times that they bought from Kragen or something like that on some of the older models. Doing that makes a huge difference. The way I want to emphasize this as we start up and you start looking at what would lead to low gross, profit. And this is, 15 years ago, I went to Tucson, Arizona and did a presentation for a 20 group of GM dealers and whatnot. And I walked into the room and I was going to do what I typically do. I was going to do inventory control. But I was sitting in the corner and these dealers were sharing and going over matrix. And remember, this again is like 15 years ago, but this subject had come up with these GM dealers. And to be quite honest with you, I really didn't want to talk about matrix, but I was listening and I thought, wow, I think only one other subject causes more discussion is lost sales. And we're not even going to go there today. This is on matrix, but they were all going around the table, looking at their gross profits, looking in their composite book, comparing numbers. And sure enough, the moderator says, well, hey, we got the parts expert here. Let's ask him, what's the perfect matrix? So I stood up and I thought, okay, I'm on the fly here. I want to talk about inventory control, but you brought this up. The moderator gets me in the middle. I said, okay, the first thing I want to do is I want to go around the room. And I got up and they had a nice big whiteboard. I said, I want you, each one of you, and there were 16 dealers in the room, I want you to give me what your customer pay gross profit is out of your composite book. So on the whiteboard, I sat and wrote down anywhere from about 33% to one dealer. One dealer was at 40%. So I said, now that I've written this all down and I've looked at everything, I said, how many of you in here are using a matrix? And 15 of the 16 dealers raised their hand. I said, okay. I said, well, the first thing I can tell you is what you should do is completely shut down your matrix. Yes, you heard me right. Completely shut down your matrix and sell everything at suggested retail. Because as most of you know, even especially 15 years ago, the difference between costs and suggested retail was a 40% gross profit margin. So I got the look from everybody in this room like, this guy's an expert. The one thing he says is shut your matrix down and sell everything at completely retail. This guy is Nuts. So the moderator, he looks and says, Chuck, how can you quantify this answer? I said, it's simple. I said, if you sell everything at suggested retail, you got a 40% gross profit margin. I said, one thing I can tell you, one person in this room is at 40%. The rest of you are hanging around 33, 37%. I said, one thing I can tell you, if you sold everything at suggested retail, you'd be at 40%. So one thing I can promise you, your matrix isn't working. Otherwise, you'd all be well over 40%. So then I worked it backwards. Kaylee?
No, it's okay. I thought you were done with the thought. We do have a question, but finish.
Okay. Yeah, let me finish the thought here, Kaylee, okay? So anyway, once we started delving into it and I brought up all the exceptions why their matrix was not working effectively, I mean, once I told them that, they were nuts. They were just clamoring for an answer. And I said, here it is. It's simple. How many times do you sell a part under your CPRO? How many times do employees buy parts? Oh, that gets clocked under it. You sell it fleet and you discount it. Oh, yeah. And you got maintenance or menu items. Oh, yeah. So once you brought it all back, their matrix was just a very small portion of what they were selling. And so that's why the emphasis here, when you look at some of the unrealistic matrix tables that we say day in and day out, it can really make a significant difference on when you sit and you say, I have a really good matrix, but yet you're having a hard time really even getting to that 40% gross profit threshold. More than likely, it's your business mix and you're doing a lot more maintenance work than your matrix. So with that thought being said, Kaylee, what's the question?
Okay, so we have a question on what's the preferred method, markup or margin? And then there's a screenshot. I don't know if you can go in and see that.
I can't, but that's okay. In other words, that's a great question. Some people do their markup from list. Some people do it from cost. When you do your margin from cost, that's where you can lock in and make sure that if you're doing cost plus 67 is a 40% profit margin. So you can work from there. That's a baseline. And one of the things when you're dealing with that, now you get to the point where is the manufacturer markup still that 40% profit margin? And what we've found is a lot of dealers now, especially we found this with Motorcraft and Ford several years ago, is we had several dealers when we went in and did a cost plus matrix, or they were using it, they actually found out doing that cost plus, it locked in their profit margin, but we got phone calls saying, my matrix is selling lower than what suggested retail is. And what we found out with Motorcraft is some of their profit margins were 60, 65%, which would be like cost plus 90. And so building it from that side of the realm will lock in your profit margins. Doing it from a cost plus basis, you'll know how you can get your percentage locked in. And then there's about half the people who actually do it from a list. And when you do it from a list, there's a chance that you're going to get a lot more fluctuation. Whereas when you do it from a cost plus, you're locking in that profit percentage. And so with that being said, and hopefully that answered your question. If it didn't, get a little more specific and I'll do that for you. But looking at this next slide, protecting margin on maintenance items. I have to tell everyone listening here, this right here, and sometimes I feel like I'm hitting a brick wall when I do this. Frequent manufacturer cost increases risk compressing profit margins on the core maintenance items, brake pads, oil filters, air filters. What that's really saying, and thinking that about 85% of all of your customer pay RO sales fall under matrix. The problem that we see when we go in and start looking and analyze customer pay RO gross is all of a sudden we get to oil filters. You're making 10%. oil, maybe 5%. One of the things we just did, and I just did this analysis for a dealer a couple of weeks ago, is they had never changed their menu pricing in ages. Okay. And the problem that they've run into, and one of the biggest reasons that we hear that they haven't updated menu pricing is the service manager or the service department doesn't want to have to rewrite their menu pricing, for certain jobs, oil changes, brake jobs, whatnot. The problem is the manufacturer has been increasing the cost of these products, and so they leave their sale price the same. The cost is coming up. The gross is shrink. That's what this slide is emphasizing. Where we see you can make the most significant difference at today's dealership is adjusting maintenance items to make sure you're getting some grosses. Do you matrix them? No. But one of the things that we found is that if the manufacturer is raising prices, you have to as well. The service department has to make adjustments to this menu pricing, to overcome increases in appreciation. Because let's face it, since COVID, most dealerships' parts inventories have appreciated as much as 15% because the cost of parts has gone up significantly. So if you're using menu pricing from 3 years ago and you haven't made these adjustments, you could be in a lot of trouble. So one of the strategies to protect the margin, and again, you could go out and look at the margins that you're making, is to implement a dynamic pricing model that adjusts retail prices with manufacturer cost fluctuations. And what I mean by that is maybe you isolate, your maintenance items into several stock groups or sources so that you can control the pricing effectively there. Maybe you're doing, 5% below retail or something like that. I did a webinar just like this about 5 years ago with Dealer's Edge. And I brought up this exact subject about, taking a set of brake pads and raising the price $5. Not $25, just $5. And I gave an example of where the gross profit margin went from 18% up to 23% just by raising that menu priced item by $5. And I actually had a service manager who came in and asked the question, and he said, if you take a set of brake pads from $69.95 to $74.95, raising it $5, he says, I no longer can compete. I came back and made the statement. I said, well, having been a fixed ops director, I have to tell you, if the difference between a quality brake job at a dealership is $5 and that makes you non-competitive, I said, no offense, but you got the wrong service writers. They're order takers instead of salespeople, building value into the quality. The guy started to cuss and we had to cut him off. So it showed you how passionate the service manager was about holding these prices down. Excuse me. Negotiate bulk purchasing or alternative sourcing for frequently used parts. That kind of goes to speak for itself. Sometimes you get these QP orders that offer you a 10, 15, 20% discount. The rule of thumb for me personally, that's where you build depth into your inventory. And as long as you don't exceed a 60 to 90 day supply of those fast moving maintenance items, you can pass on some of that discount or be able to discount it a little differently. And again, we already said this, emphasize the quality and whatnot. So, one of the things, that I can tell you is that this subject is number one when it comes to parts and service managers and fixed ops directors and dealers all jumbling to try and get this retail markup. And I just want to emphasize that the first place you start, number one, we're at Q&A now. Like I told you, this is going to be under 30 minutes. But one of the things you start with, number one, go pull your customer pay RO for a certain period of time. I usually emphasize about 60 days and look at your gross profit. Go in and pull it and show your cost of your quantity, your cost of sale, your sale price, what the profit margin was. And then in Excel, you can easily build a gross profit percentage. Now go sort that by descending gross profit by part number. And that's where we always emphasize, look at these numbers and now go focus at the lower end. And this is where we start to see 8, 10, 12% gross profit on these menu items, which are really dragging down the gross profit. You don't have to sit and raise it 20%, a little bit at a time. I guarantee you, you go in and adjust these menu prices. That's where you can get your grosses up. And, there's some reason for grosses anymore that are really critical. One of the things is ASR programs, especially RIM with 4GM, Aero, whatnot, getting this gross up a little bit, because one of the things that we see day in and day out, there's a lot more obsolescence. You guys would be shocked to know that our average GM dealer, we work with over 70 GM dealers nationally, the average GM store, remember, this is the average, on non-rim protected parts, 23% of their inventory is obsolete, over 13 months of non-guaranteed inventory. That's an average. And it's grown that way because you can never buy your way out of an obsolescence problem like you could 25 years ago. You have to come up with some ways to use some dollars and accrue some dollars, because the CSO will never get rid of it. So what you do is, okay, we need to make some adjustments and take some money from the gross so we can purge some of this obsolescence or sell it off through a parts broker. Well, one of the ways you do that is by tweaking this. Last thing you want to do is take your existing gross and utilize that to throw away parts. What you want to do is build those grosses up. I can simply, and I bring this up, and this is where I'm going to stop for today, but I bring up warranty uplift. Everybody seems to be diving, trying to get that warranty uplift, cost plus 100%. Give me that sampling of 100 repair orders. And there's some great companies out there that can really help you with that. But my emphasis here is that getting that sampling is one thing, getting that markup on warranty is another. Usually maintenance ends up suffering on the back end, and that's where the low grosses really drag this down. And so what I can emphasize to you when it comes to warranty uplift and things like that is some of these realistic matrices that you see, is something that you really want to look into. A lot of the workshops that I did in the last 5 years is when I get parts managers together, I'd have them bring their matrix, their existing retail matrix. Then what we do is I'd have them bring their override reports and where the sale price was overridden. And, they may have a matrix escalator category, a penny to $2.50, $2.50, and they have cost plus 600%. Well, then we look at the override report, and all their overrides are in these categories that have these unrealistic markups. And I said, so why do you have cost plus 600 on a penny to $2.50? And it's overridden 95% of the time. Well, how do you look a customer in the face and tell them that plastic clip, 10 of them, is $50 because of the markup? So I allow them to override it. And I said, that's my point. Make it realistic so the counter people don't have to override it. So those are some things and that's just working counterproductively. And so one of the things I can emphasize here as well, sometimes simpler is better. Potentially going in and just making sure that you mark up some of your products in your matrix, these captive items, just a simple 10% up to about $150, 5% up to about $300, and then turn it off. A simple matrix like that, now it becomes much more sellable and realistic for your counter people to be able to sell, and you don't get a lot of overrides. So, when you see a lot of overrides, that's the first thing that tells me, even though you got this matrix out there, nobody's using it anyway. Going in and capturing your customer pay and sorting it by descending gross profit will be a great eye-opener, because we certainly get a lot of dealers who call up and go, wow, we didn't realize we were giving away X for Y, a gross profit percentage. So hopefully this seminar, and again, in January, we're going to put some realistic samplings out there. This will be a little bit more detailed, so I hope you'll all join us for that. So Kaylee, do we have any other questions?
No, I don't think so. There was just one, I think when you were talking about return reserve, someone I think was agreeing it doesn't cover it these days.
No,
So
and that's no secret, Kaylee. And some of you may have heard me say this, but about 5 years ago, I went and spoke to the Connecticut Auto Dealers Association, and I had about 85 dealers and general managers and controllers in the room, Kaylee, and the subject came up about warranty uplift. And so I asked the dealers in the room, all of them, except for one BMW dealer who said BMW wouldn't allow him to do it at this point, but this is 5 years ago. All of them had some sort of warranty uplift. The Connecticut auto dealers that got it all done, they're all getting warranty uplift, and their percentages were anywhere from cost plus 75 to cost plus 100. So I said, that's great. So I asked them a simple question. I said, what's the first thing you did when you got that new warranty uplift? And of course, one dealer popped up and said, well, we implemented and started counting the money. And he high-fived his buddy next to him. I said, that's great. Of course. What's the number two thing that you did? And I started to get some deer in the headlight looks and a mixture of people looking around. And I said, did you adjust your pay plans for your counter people? Because literally you just went from cost plus 40 to cost plus 80. And you just gave the people who get paid off the gross profit, you just gave them an instant 40% raise. Congratulations. And a couple of people said, yeah, we thought about that. And some other dealers in the room didn't go there. And I go, what's the third thing you did? And then everybody looked and went, what's the third thing? What the heck are you talking about? I said, did you ever think that maybe you should have taken about 10% of this new warranty uplift gross profit margin and applied it to accrual to throw away obsolete parts? And they all kind of looked around, and I went, how many of you in the room, and this emphasizes the point, how many of you think your parts manager has gone to heck in a handbasket, their obsolescence is going up, and you're wondering why? And literally 80% of the dealers raised their hand. And I said, that's because they took away return allowance. The manufacturer just played a shell game. They started changing all their discounts, their incentives. They've even changed warranty labor time guides. The manufacturer is still making their percentage. They're giving you cost plus 100. Congratulations. But on the backside, they're taking it in all the other places. And one of the primary areas they're taking it away from, and I'm preaching to the choir, all of you who are listening, they took it away from return reserve and incentives to get rid of obsolete inventory. Kaylee, I'm glad you brought that up, and hopefully, folks, that really helps you a lot, understanding that this day and age, if you look at obsolescence, and in most retail markets this day and age, if you just go Google obsolescence, you'll find out most retail outlets where you go and buy parts, they actually, take a grocery store, a clothing store, they actually take about 10% of their gross profit and automatically accrue it to deal with obsolescence. So, at car dealerships, we used to get a certain amount of return allowance or whatnot. And of course, there's parts that are guaranteed. But when you run into this situation now, you have to sit and adjust and make these adjustments so that you can continually purge junk parts out of your inventory. There you go. Woo-hoo!
Wow, Jeff, that was awesome. That was 30 minutes. I don't think we've ever done a webinar in 30 minutes, but Yeah, like Chuck said, we will do this again in January. Next month, we should be covering stock orders. I believe Blake's going to be covering that topic. And unless anything crazy happens, we might change that topic. But we'll let you guys know. And I put in there, if you have any questions, just send it to info@partsedge.com. And yeah, do you have anything else, Chuck?
Nope, nope, except, hey, I'm giving you some homework. Go pull your
Yes.
customer pay gross, go pull your customer pay sales and analyze it. And I'll tell you what, it'll be a great eye opener, and it'll help you a lot to try and get these margins and protection to get some grosses up for whatever reason. If you want to put it in the till, great. But if you have obsolescence, this is the way to go to try and get some more gross to help you retire some of that stuff. There you go. I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you.
Everybody, have a great day. Thanks for your time. Please reach out if you have any questions.